Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, I wanted to talk about a really interesting thread that appeared on Reddit, which you can see here, and I'll put a link to it below. It's talking about the future of Blight content, and, just someone giving their opinions on what it should be. So I thought, I'm going to come across and give mine, and probably go into a little bit too much depth into how I think Blight should be added into the core game. As I see it, this breaks down into a few points. There's Blights in the wild, there's Blighted maps, and there's anoints. But firstly, I want to talk about something, a little bit of a seed that has been placed potentially for the future. And that is when you talk to Sister Cassia and select Blighted maps. And her text here is basically giving a sense that there may be a sort of central Blight encounter that we haven't yet seen. You see, these larger growths, these Blighted maps you've found, they may lead us to the original source of the Blight. Now that's clearly not implemented in the game at the moment, but I feel like there's a potential that there's something further that might be included in 3.9 that will build on the Blights that we've seen so far. So if that happens, then clearly there's going to be alternate plans for implementing all of this content into the game. But I want to go through the things that, assuming that there is no overarching plan for there to be some sort of ultimate Blight boss at the center of the Atlas in some new type of Blighted map. Assuming that's not the case, let's have a quick think on how Blight could be added into the core game, and for that matter, whether it's worth doing. So, firstly, a little bit of a summary of how I feel about how Blights have worked in the game so far. And let's just put D&D on so that we don't end up seeing 1,000,001 chat things. I feel like the Blight encounters in maps have been really polarizing. Early on in the league, there were a couple of absolute top tier players, people like Grimro, the streamer, who put out videos saying that Blights weren't worth doing because they gave less loot per hour than running through maps at sort of 70-second a map pace with a tornado shot build. And that's true. If you're someone who is capable of clearing a complete map, high tier map in 70 seconds, including looting everything and running 50 maps an hour, then Blights are indeed not worth your while doing. However, it's not just the case that this is true for it's not the case that this is true for the top 1% of the player base. This is very much a top couple of 100 players that are in that sort of situation. If you already own a Headhunter by day 7, then Grimro's advice was aimed at you. On the other hand, if you're the sort of person that doesn't own a Headhunter by day 7, and that isn't at any point in the league chaining 50 maps in an hour, all of them tier 16, then in that case, there is a lot more to be said about doing the Blights. They're often the most lucrative part of the map, and they drop a lot of loot of all different types. So that's Blights in the wild. Blighted maps have been a performance nightmare for some sections of the player base, and have been an absolute joy for others. So it's one of those things that I think if it's shoved down your face, it's going to disappoint people. But they're also such a fun encounter that I think there should be ways to work towards getting them. And anoints have been an interesting thing where they're a legitimately rare upgrade to items, which haven't existed in the game for a while. We think back to, if you played the game around the era of the Forsaken Masters expansion, you'll remember that back then, acquiring a 6-link was not the sort of stepping stone goal that it is for an endgame player now. It was a major goal that you would work a lot of your league towards getting. Then once you got it, it was this major milestone that you had. I think the closest that we have to that now is unlocking the fifth sextant on the Atlas by killing Uberelda, which might not be your 5th, it might be your 4th. If you're running a shaped Atlas, it'll be your 4th. That's sort of the closest we've got to a whole of league goal for someone that is a 24 or 40 player. If you're a 36 or 40 or 40 player, there's not really anything comparable anymore. So, as 6-links have gotten a lot more common than they used to be, and also we just kill monsters a lot faster, and so you're more likely to acquire them via all sorts of different means, build up a lot of fusings over time, there hasn't really been any replacement for that huge character power upgrade that requires a large amount of investment. Enter the anointment system and the most powerful, the highest end anointments that you can get. Things like getting Soul of Steel or Constitution. So if we bring up the Passive tree, you'll see Constitution is an incredibly powerful node, 14% increased maximum life. Soul of Steel is stronger again, and it's somewhere down here. Not there. Where are you, my little friend? There you are. Soul of Steel is a triple gold one. You know, just absolutely incredible character power boost that you can get. That is a major milestone when you get it. And of course, it's something you're only going to anoint onto the very, very best of amulets. On the flip side, there's much weaker ones, like Diamond Skin, which I've got anointed at the moment. 12% all res, 3% movement speed. That's great for my build. There's also some armor there, which someone else might care about, and I don't. But this is still a very powerful node that frees up, frees up a lot of gearing choices. So, with all of that said, the anoints have been a considerable flexibility and power boost in one spot. I want to talk about them first. So, I think this flexibility is great. Having the ability to go for boosts that increase your character defensively, boosts that are, that are cheaper versions of those powerful defensive boosts, being able to go for niche abilities like, there you are, Disciple of the Slaughter, frenzy charges on kill, minimum frenzy charges, being able to pick up an extra charge, or being able to pick up Whispers of Doom. Lots of very, very powerful options on the tree. And the thing that I like about them is that they're genuine choices. One player is going to pick to invest in Soul of Steel. Another player is going to choose Whispers of Doom, on potentially even on the same build. You may not. Players will diverge in their gear choices, and that's, I think, a real positive, especially in this multi-modding dominated meta, where gear is looking more and more similar from player to player. So, I think it would be good to keep anoints in the game, but I am conscious that this does increase character power even more, and there's a cost to all of this power creep, and that is that it starts trivializing the hardest content that we have available in bulk, which is tier 16 maps. So the more powerful characters get compared to tier 16 maps, the more trivial tier 16 maps become, the less engaging they become to play, the less fun they are. And so, and obviously this isn't a case for for newer players. This is more from a veteran's perspective here. So for that reason, I think that if anoints do go core, I do think that there should be some nerfs to the passive tree in other ways. So, that can just be 1 or 2% off various damage nodes. I don't think the defense nodes need a nerf. I think it is the damage ones that could be trimmed down a little bit, and that would balance out the extra power boost that we get by being able to pick up, Diamond Skin cheaply or Soul of Steel at a high cost, and boost up the character power that we've got at the moment. I feel like Ring Anoints can go Legacy with little or no loss. I don't think they add very much to the game. And I feel Map Anoints was something that was rushed in for this league in order to basically provide some sort of use for all of the excess oils that we got. I think oils are probably going to be a bit scarcer in the future, and there's going to be less need for a sync for them. I think they should also go Legacy, but in the discussion on Blighted maps, I do have an alternate suggestion as well. If a sync is desired for lower tier oils, though, the anoints could just be 2, 4, 6, and so on up to 24% XP for the 12 different tiers of oil. I'll talk about oil rarity last, because I think it's its own issue. So, blights in the wild. Let's face it, there is a percentage of the player base that run computers that exceed the minimum specs for the game, but that have an absolutely terrible experience with Blight Encounters. And there's people who the gameplay doesn't gel with, or builds that are absolutely woeful at blights. So that'd be anyone that is a fan of melee builds. I want to put together a series of proposals that keep blights available for people like myself that enjoy them, whilst not having them shoved down the throats of everyone else. So I don't think we want to see them go into the core game the way that breaches have, where one map in 10 has a breach and there's a few other ways to force additional breaches on the maps. I think there should be something where there should be a baseline of 0 and various ways to force them on. So I'll start by saying I think there should be no chance for breaches to spawn in the wild on random areas. All Blight encounters should require some agency to unlock, but not be rare if you shoot for them. Kind of like Harbingers in the current state of the game, or Warbands. They're not particularly rare if you deliberately run Lighthouse maps for in order to get the warbands, or if you deliberately run Zana's missions and choose the Harbinger maps, there's plenty of them, or if you use Zana's map device to force them onto maps. Plenty of ways that you can get them to spawn, but they're just not very common otherwise. Secondly, once that change is made, blights can be sped up a bit. It's not so much the preparation time that I feel is the problem, it's the first 10 seconds of a blight encounter is too slow paced, and I think that the monsters that are going to spawn in that first 10 seconds should all go bang, 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 bang straight away. Make them intense from the start. That's the thing that made breaches fun. Back before our characters were so powerful that a breach in a tier 16 map was no longer scary, at that period, the first couple of seconds of a breach was pretty damn terrifying because you were just getting swarmed from all sides, and that was actually a really great experience. So I think that, making the first 10 seconds of spawns all happen at once, so that you've done your initial tower setup if you feel the need to take that time to do so, then bang, 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 bang. In terms of encountering blights before maps, I think the best way to do this is to associate them with specific zones. So, I think there's a few that thematically fit, and I want to quickly go through those. I think that the Dread Thicket in Act 2, the Dried Lake in Act 4, Coast in Act 6, the High Gardens in Act 8, the Boiling Lake in Act 9, and the Act 10 Feeding Trough would all make sense as places. Now, these are zones that players, at least experienced players, just go through once on a playthrough. So I don't think that there's any drama to having a blight in them. If you're a veteran player, you feel like you're suitably geared, you can just blitz straight past them. If you're a newer player that's struggling a bit, or you just want to explore this, this Path of Exile's history, then you can run the Dried Lake 6 times in a row and go there and keep doing the blight, get a bit of loot so that you feel like you can take on the increased challenges of bosses like Calm and Duresso. And for those of us that are veterans, we're used to those fights, then we don't need to power up before them. We know the mechanics. We're not going to be taking the sort of hits that a player that's newer to the game will be taking on those fights. So that means that there's access to oils and some of the anoints early in the game for players that want them. It also means that you get a whole bunch of rare items there as well. Blights could conceivably also show up in Val side areas during leveling as well. Now, I think Zana's missions. Just as Zana has Harbingers in her missions, she should also have Blights in there. So you'll have the option to pick a map that has some Blights in it, maybe even very rarely get a Blighted map, but I don't think that should be the main focus. I think the main focus should be having Blight encounters in a normal map. Now, Elva. Elva, I think, is the best place to seriously integrate the Blights through. Elva's Poison Garden room is a really logical fit. It's a bad room at present, so there's nothing lost by transforming it and giving it a new identity. Firstly, I'd give the architect there, I call him Tacity, others call him Takati. I think Takati is actually right, but I've always called him Tacity, so that rolls off the tongue. Give him a chance to drop a Blighted map. Tier 1 room dropping white maps, Tier 2 yellow, and Tier 3 red. Or, alternately, have it so that when Takati is in the zone, then the Omnitech drops the Blighted map instead. Second, add a Blight encounter to the Guardian. This could be a 5-way in Tier 1, 8-way in Tier 2, and an 8-way with all reward nodes lucky and with 2 bosses on Tier 3. So that there's a big difference from the tiers, and the Tier 3 version, kind of like the Legion room, the Tier 3 version is an amped up version from the League itself. Jun and Scarabs. I think there should be Blight Scarabs added, and that there's a lot of room to reshuffle the Syndicate rewards for them to fit. I feel Tora would make the most sense to be aligned to the Blights, but then because she's currently aligned to Harbingers, the Harbinger Scarabs need to be fit somewhere else. There's a bunch of ways that could be done. Einhar I'll come back to later when I'm talking about Blighted maps. Nico, I think there's space for a couple of Nico-specific, for a couple of Blight-specific nodes in the Delve Mines. They would fit in the Fungal Caverns areas of biome well, and they could also fit, from an oil perspective, could fit in the Petrified Forest as well. So, could even conceivably have one of the cities, like maybe all 3 of the cities, have maybe a 1 in 20 chance for any given city node to spawn as a Blighted city. But that'd be quite transformative change being made there. I also think that some of the Blight items could be found behind fractured walls. as, you know, a Blight-themed Fractured Wall loot node. There's also space for there to be Blights added through prophecies, and I was thinking that you could have two prophecies, a common one that causes a map to have a Blight in it, and a rare one, so sort of think five link prophecy rarity, that says something like, "Twisted by corruption, a great threat will drop a gateway to an even more corrupt world." And then when you kill the boss of a corrupted map, then you'll receive a 6-mod corrupted rare Blight map drop. Sextants are another place that Blights could be added to maps, and that's something that's not intrusive at all. Players that don't want to run them can just roll over them. Players that do want to run them will receive the rewards from them. Now, a quick note on two options that I don't think should be implemented. The first one is a chance for a Varlorb to transform a map into its Blighted version. So, for instance, if you were to Varl a tower map, it would have a chance to turn into a Blighted tower. I feel that this would become one of two things. Either the probability of it happening would be extremely low, let's say 0.6% or lower, in which case it would just be this rare event that wouldn't really be noticed by many players. Alternately, if it was more than about 0.6%, it would probably be the best thing to do with Varlorbs, which would then cause the price of Varlorbs to explode upwards. So, for instance, if, again, taking the tower example because it drops some of the best divination cards in the game, you would find players would feel compelled to Varl every single tower map, and also, not just to do that, but also to run tower to the exclusion of other maps. I don't think that's a good idea, so for that reason, I don't think that Blighted maps should be implemented through Varlorbs. Possibly, though, a corrupted map could conceivably have a chance to have a Blight encounter in it. I think that could be an interesting option. The other thing I don't think should happen is adding Blight as a Zana mod. And again, that's just because it would be a false choice. It would be something you would feel you had to do. Currently, Harbinger is so good that it basically invalidates all the other choices on the Zana map device, including not running a Zana mod. The Harbinger mod is just so strong by adding all those extra monsters to the map and refunding its cost in splinters that it feels like it's mandatory to use it at the moment. And I think that a Blight Encounter one would be exactly the same. It may end up replacing Harbinger as the mandatory one. Alternately, it could be costed high, like, you know, if you costed at 8 or 10 Chaos, or costed in some other denomination, like in some other currency. But I think there's better options to be done than that. So, let's talk about Blighted maps. I find Blighted maps are some of the most fun encounters in the game, and they're totally unique in that they're multiple intense minutes, rather than traditional mapping where it's basically snooze mode for 90% of the time, then oh hell, oh hell, oh hell, I've just spawned intervention next to an allies can't die super tanky rare mob, or something like that, where you wind up with some absolutely crazy chaotic encounter. Then it's back to sort of 5 minutes of just really routine mapping again. Unfortunately, though, Blighted maps are completely unplayable for some less powerful rigs, and I don't really see any way around that. I do think there's also a really serious design flaw with the Blighted maps, and that is that the map mods don't provide enough reward to merit the risk that they add to them. And I want to propose a change here that would replace the current anointing system, and that is to give every Blighted map an implicit modifier. One Blight chest is lucky per random modifier on this map. So this would mean that an 8-mod map would have 8 chests lucky. A Elkin Go map would have 4, 5, or 6 with a heavy bias towards 4. 4 lucky chests, and you would feel that there's a benefit to chaosing it to get at least 5 mods. This would replace the need to anoint maps, and it would add a genuine reason to consider an 8-mod Blighted map, which at the moment there's just no reason to run at all. I also think that Einhar could be used to drop Blighted maps, just by virtue of adding new beasts in that do exactly that. Perhaps one of them that drops just a Blighted map, and then another one that is rarer and that drops an 8-mod Blighted map, or maybe a 6-mod corrupted Blighted map. And Jun could also, I think Jun's in the Syndicate, Torah in Transportation creates timed item traps, which is just basically pick one of these items in a certain period of time. It's a terrible choice to use at the moment because Torah is very valuable in intervention and a fairly solid choice in research, but there's an opportunity cost to putting her in Transportation and you basically get nothing for it. If, on the other hand, Torah in Transportation were given the chance of having blighted maps and top tier oils in there, in her choices, then suddenly she'd become worth considering as well. So I'll discuss this a bit more in oil drops. So let's talk about oil rarity. So firstly, a quick side note, the system as it stands is not very forward compatible. There are exactly 364 available notables and exactly 364 oil combinations. So the tree can't really expand. I don't really think it needs to. I think the tree is far bigger than our characters are able to go anywhere near exploring all of, but it is just something to keep in mind that if there is any future desire to expand the tree, then either a 13th tier of oil needs to be added, or it needs to be changed to a pick 4 from 9 system, which would then expand it to 495. Various options. There's not very many numbers that are just a bit more than 364 that can be done with this system. Now, oil drop rates currently seem tuned for the current league. At the current moment, getting the perfect anoint you want is, as I say, about in line with how much effort it took to get a 6-link back in an earlier phase of the game, like around the time of the Sacrifice of the Vaal expansion. Now, getting a good enough anoint, on the other hand, is very quickly available. I'm actually pretty happy with this current rarity. 1 golden oil per few hundred maps is rare enough that the anoints feel precious, and not so rare that they're unaffordable for players that that are willing to put in a serious effort for such a powerful reward. In that sense, again, it's like a 6-link it used to be back when they were rare. However, if the drop rates if the drop rate per Blight encounter goes core, I think that you'll find that oils will be too rare. So what I would suggest doing is dropping the number of oils that drop per oil chest and changing the biasing considerably. The goal being that a player that has their heart set on an opalescent and down anointment, so no silver, no golden oils, that by the time they get to about 80 Atlas bonus, that assuming that they do every Blight encounter that they can reasonably do on their way there, that they'll have access to the anointment that they had their heart set on. Keep the silver and golden oils rare and make them be something that are a goal, that are more of a whole of league goal for 24 or 40 players, and I'm only going to put this on amulets that I wear after level 90 item for 36 of 40 players. Then the 40 of 40 players can of course chase perfect anoints on amulets that are too implicit corrupted or that have the perfect talisman base for them. Now, let's talk about where you would get oils from. So there's going to be from Blight Encounters, but there's potential to expand that to other places. I mentioned with Torah her timed item traps before. I think the tier 3 version of this should be given a reasonably high drop rate for crimson and up oils. Potentially 100% to give a crimson or better oil, because there is a high opportunity cost to put her there. I think it'd be fine to go as high as an 8% chance to have a golden oil there and a 15% chance to see a silver, with then opalescent, crimson and black being the various bogey prizes that you could get. 100% chance to get one of those rare oils, and a smaller chance of getting a blighted map, but still considerable. And then there'll be attention, you'll probably always take a golden oil over any blighted map. You'll probably always take a blighted map over opalescent or down. But if you've got the choice between a silver oil and a blighted map, that could be an interesting choice as well. I think that Nico's Petrified Forest zones, so that's one of the 6 core biomes. Have a quick look around. Where's a Petrified Forest when you need one? That's Fungal Caverns. It's always fun trying to find the specific one that you want. Is that it? No, that's the Abyssal Depths. Anyways, Petrified Forests are one of the core biomes, if I can ever find one. There it is. Petrified Forest. This sort of biome. It's one of the weaker biomes at the moment, and I think that it could have some of its armor and weapon nodes, perhaps transformed into oil nodes. Again, they fit thematically there. I think that Einhar could be given a recipe for 4 yellow beasts, consuming 4 yellow beasts that gives an oil. That would be a use for all of the yellow beasts that accumulate over a league, and if there's the biasing would have to be worked out quite carefully on that, but it could conceivably drop occasional sort of opalescent silver and golden oils out of there. And then potentially have a rarer recipe at the higher end that uses its own red beast for a rare oil, which might be violet and up, might be crimson and up, might be opalescent and up even. Now, the other alternative, though, that I've had in mind is to keep the drop rates roughly as they are, but replace the 3-for-1 recipe for oils with a 2-for-1 recipe. Now, that would mean that the lower tier oils end up being appreciable fractions of the higher tier oils. It's not so much that the clear oils would be convenient, would be worthwhile upgrade, collecting and then upgrading into opalescence and above. It's more that the teal tier oils, the ones that are not quite in the bottom area, they would end up being a significant fraction of an opalescent with that approach. So, in summary, I think Blight Encounters have been a fun but flawed addition to the game. Something that has been great for players that, for a section of the player base, but issues with performance have marred them for a lot of the player base as well. I think they should be available in the game for us to seek out, but not necessarily shoved down our throats. And Blighted maps should be changed so that there are incentives to run them with map mods. Oils will need some sort of rebalance to be a bit more available than they are at the moment, assuming that my other suggestions are followed through. But I think that the core concepts are great, and I'd like to see the Blight Encounters remain in the game for players to seek out. Anyways, if you've got any comments or questions, definitely fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there.